What is going on with the Kurds? We've talked about this a few times since the war started. There was a rumor that was reported as a news item that I covered. Then we later found out that it wasn't true. It was covered all over the place that the Kurds had started an invasion in northwestern Iran from Iraq. And it turned out not to be true. But I decided to go back and check in on what's going on with the Kurds because they are still very much a factor in this war. So we're going to get into all that in this video. But before we do that, please make sure to go visit Israel365charity.com. That's Israel, the numbers 365charity.com. Click on the banner for Israel Under Fire or scroll down to the current projects and click on Israel at War. And Israel 365 has been raising funds to deliver them to families that are being affected by this war. There's a lot of young mothers whose husbands are being called up in the big call up of reserves that are going up north to the Lebanon border to fight in Lebanon because there's going to be a major ground invasion there. And that only adds to the needs that we are helping with. And Israel 365 is connected with a lot of great charities on the ground, and we'll make sure that the money gets into the right hands. So please go ahead and help out Israel365charity.com, Israel at War. Now, on to the story of the Kurds. Okay, so here we have Middle East Eye, again, not a friendly news outlet, but nevertheless, Iraq warns Kurdish authorities not to get drawn into war on Iran, sources say. Baghdad, that means the Iraqi government, has warned the Kurdistan regional government that it could deploy forces to the Iranian border if Kurdish groups enter the conflict. Wow. Let's say that again. Baghdad, the Iraqi government, has warned the Kurdistan regional government, that's the autonomous Kurdish zone in Iraq, that the Iraqis will deploy forces to the Iranian border to prevent the Kurds from joining if they get involved. Iraq's federal government has warned the Kurdistan regional government not to allow Kurdish groups to become involved in the war in Iran, telling Kurdish authorities that Iraqi forces could move to take control of border areas if they fail to prevent it from happening. Iraqi, Kurdish, and Turkish officials told the Middle East Eye that Baghdad delivered the warning earlier this week amid growing fears that Kurdish groups could be coerced by Washington into joining the U.S.-Israeli war in Iran. Quote, the message from Baghdad was clear. Kurdish groups must not get involved in Iran, one Iraqi official familiar with the discussion said. If the KRG cannot prevent it, then Iraqi federal forces will move to secure the border. Look at that. Kurdish and Turkish sources confirmed the warning to Middle East Eye, saying the KRG was under intense pressure from both Baghdad and neighboring countries to prevent the escalation, and speculation grows that Iranian Kurdish groups could attempt to launch operations across the frontier. The prospect of Kurdish groups entering the war has alarmed regional governments, particularly given the presence of several Iranian Kurdish opposition parties based in Iraqi Kurdistan. Okay. Their involvement would almost certainly draw retaliation from Tehran that would drag Iraq deeper into the conflict. Turkey has long viewed Kurdish armed movements across the region as a national security threat and has repeatedly warned against attempts to mobilize Kurdish factions in regional conflicts. Let's understand this point for a second. Turkey has the largest population of Kurds. Okay, the Kurds are scattered across 5 countries: Turkey, some in Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and some also in Armenia. Okay, but the largest population is in Turkey. And the Turks, Erdogan's regime, can't stand the Kurds. They're terrified of the Kurds wanting their autonomy. And the last thing that they want is a Kurdish uprising in Iran that would fan the flames of Kurdish national ambitions. They do not want the Kurds to assert their autonomy, to gain any more autonomy than what they have in Iraq. Kurdish officials have publicly sought to distance themselves from the war, warning that involvement could plunge the region into chaos. Okay. And he said, this is not our war. We've made that very clear. They don't want to get involved. And there's a lot of speculation about the Kurds possibly getting involved in the war. Now, let's understand the dynamic. I laid this out in an earlier video, but it bears repeating right now. The dynamic between the Iranian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds. So there are these Iranian Kurdish groups that have their bases of operation just over the border in Iraq, in the Erbil region there near the Iranian border. And then you have the Iraqi Kurds who have their own autonomous zone in Iraq. As I just mentioned, they have an autonomous zone and they have this working relationship with the Iraqi government. And let's remember that Iraq is one of the only countries, it's one of only 4 countries in the world that has a Shiite majority, which means that it has a lot of people there who are aligned with the Iranian regime. They also border on Turkey, so they got the Turks breathing down their necks. They got the Iranians bombing Kurdish positions in Erbil and American bases in Iraq. They don't want to get drawn into this. They're caught between the Turks and the Americans and the Iranians, and they just want everything to de-escalate in their area. And the last thing they need is an invasion of Iran by Kurds from their soil. So they want to avoid all this, and they joined in this warning with the Turks, as you saw, warning the Kurds not to get involved. So the warning was sent to the Kurdish leadership in Iraq to make sure that the Iranian Kurds in Iraq don't join the war. That's what this story is saying. Now, for the Kurds, for their part, we see this story in USA Today. No friends but the mountains. Kurds want Trump's help for Iran ground war. So take a look at this. On a Kurdish base near Iraq's border with Iran, soon there could be military boots on the ground crossing into the Islamic Republic of Iran from the terrain in Iraq, from Iraq, in the terrain of fertile valleys, deep gorges, and ancient Mesopotamian trade routes perched below the mountainous border dividing Iraq and Iran. They may not be American ones. The White House says ground operations are not part of the plan right now. President Trump has reportedly said that Iran is about to surrender, though there's no indication of that from Tehran. According to Israeli and U.S. officials, the war is designed to hunt down key figures in Iran's regime while crippling their ballistic missile arsenal and nuclear program. Still, as the war barrels forward, some exiled Iranian Kurdish opposition officials and fighters, Peshmerga, which is a name that translates into English as those who face death, told USA Today that they have an invasion plan ready to activate. All they're waiting for, they say, is U.S. military air cover to launch the operation. Quote, when we cross the border, the United States should secure the skies for us and protect us from above, said Rabbi Sharifi, a commander with the Kurdistan Freedom Party, or PAK, one of several Iranian Kurdish separatist groups based in northern Iraq. So this is an Iranian Kurdish group based in Iraq. In an interview on March 11th, we do not need nor do we expect people to take to the streets. It will. He said we don't expect that to happen. And then it talks about how there's a whole bunch of different Kurdish groups there. It says there are more than a dozen different Kurdish groups spread across the Middle East. And I want to jump down to this. Here we go. Here we go. We have no friends but the mountains is a well-known Kurdish proverb. For now, it's not clear in particular if they have a friend in the U.S. president. Trump has given contradictory statements about backing Kurdish opposition groups as a proxy ground force in the war against Iran, including the possibility of supplying them with weapons and or providing them with air support as they seek to launch an invasion. So Trump has signaled that. Kurds are one of Iran's largest ethnic minorities. Great. Trump originally said, I think it would be wonderful if they want to do that. I'd be all for it. Responding to a question about Iranian Kurdish forces launching an offensive into Iran. And then 2 days later, he reversed course saying, quote, the war is complicated enough without getting the Kurds involved. So he's been giving mixed messages. Okay. Now, despite the mixed messages Kurdish fighters have received from the Trump administration, a new coalition of exiled Iranian Kurdish groups, including the PAK, have joined forces to take advantage of the shifting dynamics around Iran and the regime's perceived frailty in the lead up and following the military action on Iran from Israel and the United States. Khalid Azizi, a spokesperson for the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, that's another one of these groups, which is part of this coalition, traveled to Washington to try to gain support, and they're looking for support from the Trump administration. So here you have the governments of Iraq, Turkey, and the Kurds in Iraq warning that there should be no Kurdish invasion from Iraqi territory. And meanwhile, the Iranian Kurdish groups are getting ready for a fight. And we see this here also. Kurdish forces are prepared to act against the regime, PDKI official tells the Jerusalem Post. Okay, the Kurdish forces have organized a military and are now awaiting external material support to arrive before they carry out a ground operation in Iran. Okay. The 6 Kurdish parties that recently joined together as a coalition were preparing both their military and diplomatic forces for the potential fall of Tehran, but they were uncertain if they would play a role. Okay, they need external support, and this external support has to be from the USA. Okay, the guy they were interviewing here is Razgar Alani, who is the representative of this group in the United Kingdom. Okay, and he then says, as Mr. Trump said, the Kurds are our ally and they already paid a heavy price. I don't want them to be bullied and hurt. Questioned about, now look at this, questioned about the recent statements against the Kurdish coalition by Iran's exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who claimed the organizations were separatist groups that collaborated with Ayatollah Khomeini and were now threatening the territorial integrity of Iran, Alani rejected that the Kurdish people were seeking to damage Iranian sovereignty. When the coalition announced its formation, the parties released a statement swearing to continue to struggle for the overthrow of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to achieve Kurdish people's right to self-determination, and to establish a national and democratic entity based on the political will of the Kurdish nation in Iranian Kurdistan. Alani said that the accusations of separatism were often used to slander Kurdish groups, but they only wanted to see federalism and their rights respected and honored. What does he mean by federalism? We are Iranians, he said, but we are Kurdish Iranians, and we want to stay inside Iran. We want our rights inside Iran. I think this is just, unfortunately, propaganda from some opposition, even the regime in Tehran. They use this propaganda. While admitting there's a dream of self-determination and Kurdish statehood, Alani asserted that Iran is a beautiful and rich country with people from all ethnic backgrounds, and said he would be against destroying that. So here's what's going on. Let me back up and explain. The Iranian Kurds identify as Iranian, as he said right here. And I've heard this before. I've heard this from people I've spoken to Kurds and that I've spoken to, actually. And what they're looking for is federalism, meaning their goal for the day after plan, when everyone talks about what's going to happen to Iran after this whole war, if and when, hopefully, the regime falls, their goal is a federalist system where there will be a Kurdish autonomous region that is part of Iran. Okay, that's what he says that they're gunning for. But the problem is that there are a lot of different groups. So in this piece here in the Times of Israel, they highlight that problem. Okay, the Kurds, numbering 30 to 40 million, are considered the world's largest stateless ethnic group. Culturally and linguistically close to Persians, they are mostly Sunni Muslims, living in distinct but linked communities, primarily in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Okay. Syria's Kurds, the largest ethnic minority in the country, make up 9% of that country. Okay, it goes through the different I want to, here we go. It's a fairly poor region of Iran, the Kurdish area, like a lot of peripheral areas of the country. That breeds resentment towards the central government. Out of that resentment have sprung a range of small armed Kurdish groups with diverse ideologies who have fought against Iran, against the regime, and occasionally against each other. Now, here they are. The Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan is the oldest of the groups. They're calling for regime change and autonomy for Kurds within a democratic Iran. As I pointed out, that's the federalism concept. The Kurdistan Free Life Party is a branch of the Marxist PKK and is designated as a terrorist group by the US. It's also advocating for autonomy in a decentralized Iran, but they obviously have a different political idea of what that autonomy looks like. Being Marxists, they're different than the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan. And then you have some armed groups like the Kurdistan Freedom Party are fighting for an independent Kurdish state. Okay, so they don't want federalism at all. This is the problem with the Kurds. I mentioned this in my previous video about them. The Kurds themselves can't seem to get along. As I mentioned earlier, there's more than a dozen different Kurdish groups scattered across the region. There's so many of them. Meanwhile, you still have a lot of Kurdish leaders trying to tone down the rhetoric and say, don't worry, we're not trying to break up Iran. We want to be a part of it. Speaking to France 24 from an undisclosed location, Abdullah Motadi, Secretary General of the Iranian Kurdistan Opposition Komala Party, described the Kurds as the most organized section of Iranian society, and saying that we don't want to break up Iran. We just want federalism. He also denied that the CIA and the Mossad were helping them. And then we have this. Syria's Kurds caution Iran's Kurds against aligning with the U.S. against Tehran. This is so fascinating. See, in Syria, in the northeastern part of Syria, you have a Kurdish population. And before this war broke out, one of the big topics that was being talked about, and I talked about it a fair amount, both here and on the Israel 365 news channel, is that the Kurds in northeast Syria who helped the Americans fight against ISIS were now being thrown under the bus by the Americans. They were being betrayed by the Americans as the Americans were embracing the Ashara, the Turkish-aligned Ashara regime. That's al-Julani, whatever, that new jihadist regime in Syria that was, again, that is an extension or a protectorate of Turkey, really a Turkish-aligned regime, and the Americans were undermining the Turks' independence there. So here we have this story. Kurdish residents of northeast Syria warned Iran's Kurds against aligning with the U.S. to fight the Iranian government, citing their own experience in Syria in recent months as evidence that their Iranian counterparts will be abandoned. Okay, look at that. So that throws another wrinkle into things. And then we have this editorial that ran in the Jerusalem Post a few days ago, written by a few prominent Iranian exiles saying that we are Iranians and we're Kurdish. It's not a contradiction. And the messaging they're putting out is that they are not opposed to Reza Pahlavi. They're not opposed to the unity of Iran. They don't really want independence, and no one should worry about that. They're trying to counter the charge against them that they're trying to break up Iran. Part of what this is all about is that the Iranian regime is saying that the Kurds want to break up Iran. And that's propaganda, or their claim, at least these groups are claiming it's propaganda. We saw that there are some Kurdish groups that really want autonomy. And the reason they're fighting back against that is that one of the interesting aspects of Iranian culture, Iranian nationalism, is that in all of this turmoil, the territorial integrity of Iran, the idea that Iran is one nation of Iranians, even though there's a lot of different ethnic groups, but that there's one Iranian people and one Iranian nation, is very important to Iranians. So whenever anyone talks about a possibility of breaking up Iran, that actually makes people oppose them. So the Kurds don't want to be opposed by the Iranian people, So they're trying to tamp down these rumors that what they really want is their own autonomy. Meanwhile, they're waiting on the sidelines. They're caught in this tight spot. We saw a few, near the beginning of the war, the Israelis were bombing IRGC positions, Iranian regime positions near the Iraq-Iran border in an apparent attempt to pave the way for a Kurdish invasion that was reportedly starting, but then it wasn't starting. And now we have all these pressures coming from Turkey and from Iraq, from Baghdad, saying, no, don't go in there. The Iraqis even saying that they'll deploy their own troops to prevent a Kurdish invasion. Meanwhile, the Kurds are saying they want to invade, and all they need is air cover from the United States, that's what they're waiting for, that assistance, and that they can play an important role in taking down the regime. Right? This is what they're saying. With Peshmerga forces ready, if protected and supported enough by the United States, we can do a lot of things, and it could be the beginning of the liberation of Iran. So they're messaging that they can help bring down the regime if they just get the military support that they need. If that's all they need, and then they can really help. They're awaiting a green light. They need the external support, and this external support has to be from the USA. If they haven't received but they haven't received the guarantee yet. These are the things that they're saying. So that's the Kurdish situation right now. It's a tough stalemate situation. Again, pressure not to invade by the Turks and the Iraqis, who might even intervene to prevent them from invading Iran. Meanwhile, the Kurds are signaling to the Americans, hey, give us some air support. The Americans have been giving mixed messages since the beginning of the war about whether they want or don't want the Kurds to invade. The Israelis have been not messaging anything, but they've been taking actions to allow the Kurds the ability to go in and invade. And then there's the whole issue of, do they want their independence or not? And do they want to carve out, do they want to break up Iran, or do they want to be part of Iran? And meanwhile, you have the Syrian Kurds saying, be careful about aligning with the United States, because they'll betray you just like they betrayed us. So that's the current situation with the Kurds. And not a simple scenario, but let's hope that everything works out okay for everybody. But the way I see it right now, I don't think the Kurds are going to be invading anytime soon, especially if the Iraqi government, the Iraqi army, the Iraqi Kurds, and the Turks are all warning them not to do anything. And if the Americans don't defy the Turks and step up and give air cover, then it's not going to happen. And I don't think the Americans are going to do that. The United States has enough problems right now managing the messaging on this war and its alliances and what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. And reportedly, the Turks have told the Americans to back off of supporting the Kurds. On the other hand, allowing the Kurds or supporting the Kurds to go in and cross the border, that could help destabilize the regime even more in the northwestern part of Iran. So that's where things stand. Hope this update was helpful. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And thank you for growing the channel. God bless.